Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You guys know how much I love getting your requests, and this one is really interesting. This time, you're curious about the new leadership over at the FBI, and you sent over a couple of articles, one from the AP and one from The Guardian, both are about Dan Bongino being appointed as the new FBI Deputy Director.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story for sure.
It really is just Bongino's background in general. I mean, you're talking about someone who was in the Secret Service. He protected Presidents Bush and Obama. He's a best-selling author. He was a political candidate like 3 different
Three
times.
times.
And now he's like a major voice in conservative media with this hugely popular podcast. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what caught my eye too, right? It's like, okay, former Secret Service agent author, sure, but Deputy Director of the FBI, that's not just some, honorary title, right?
right.
This is a position with real power. I mean, he's responsible for the day-to-day operations of the entire bureau. So to have someone with such a strong political background, who's so outspoken in the media, right in the heart of the FBI, I mean, that's got to raise some eyebrows, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And it gets even more interesting when you consider who Bongino will be working under Director Kash Patel,
Oh, yeah?
who's another big Trump ally. Patel was chief of staff to the acting director of national intelligence under Trump and was super involved in that whole Ukraine scandal. So now you have two people who are both really close to Trump running the FBI. That's a big shift for the Bureau.
It's a huge shift. And yeah, the FBI is supposed to be impartial, right, above the political fray. But this appointment with Patel already at the helm is making some people nervous, especially Democrats. They're worried about bias,
Yeah,
and that the FBI might be used to target political opponents.
sure.
I can understand why they'd be concerned about that.
Absolutely. The possibility of politically motivated investigations is a real concern, and it's something that watchdog groups and lawmakers are going to be looking at very carefully. But even beyond that, there's Patel's whole vision for the FBI. He's talked about restructuring the Bureau, moving employees around, shifting the focus back to more traditional crime fighting. It's a big agenda, and it makes you wonder how Bongino's role is going to fit into all of that.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the articles mentions that Bongino actually called the Secret Service, where he used to work, a failed agency.
Oh, wow.
He even urged Trump to reform it. So if he felt that strongly about his previous agency, what does that tell us about how he might approach the FBI, an organization that he's now a key leader of?
That's a good question. I mean, it definitely suggests that Bongino isn't afraid to shake things up and that he could be pretty critical of how things have been done in the past, whether that leads to positive change or just creates a lot of internal friction. Well, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, we'll have to see. And there's one more thing from these articles that I just have to bring up. This whole thing about Bongino calling for a commission to investigate 2 assassination attempts on Trump.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know, right? What is going on there?
That's a pretty bold statement, and it definitely adds another layer of complexity to his appointment. I mean, on the one hand, you could see it as genuine concern for the safety of a former president, but on the other hand, it raises questions about his potential biases and whether those beliefs could impact his judgment in this new role.
Okay, so hold on a second, because we're talking about someone who was not only in the Secret Service and is now second in command at the FBI,
Right.
but he's also this really popular conservative commentator and podcast host with a huge platform, and he is not shy about sharing his political views. So how does that public image, those strong opinions, how do those potentially affect his work at the FBI, an agency that's supposed to be neutral?
Right? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you balance a very public and politically charged persona like a job that requires impartiality and discretion? It's a tough balancing act, and it'll be interesting to see how Bongino handles it.
It really will. So far, we've got this really fascinating picture of Dan Bongino, former Secret Service agent, author, political candidate, conservative media star. And now he holds one of the most powerful positions in the FBI. It's almost like a political thrill,
Yeah.
But there's one more piece of this puzzle that we need to look at Bongino's actual experience in the Secret Service.
Okay.
How could that shape his approach to leading the FBI?
Yeah, that's a really important point that we haven't really talked about yet. I mean, it's true that Bongino has criticized law enforcement agencies, even the Secret Service, but he also spent years protecting presidents from both parties.
That's true.
I mean, he literally safeguarded the lives of both Presidents Bush and Obama. That kind of experience has to count for something, right?
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't really thought about it like that. I mean, that's a pretty wide range of political perspectives, even within the Secret Service.
Right.
Makes you wonder what he learned from those experiences and how that might affect his leadership style at the FBI.
Exactly. Working so closely with the highest office in the country, no matter who the president is, you have to face some pretty unique challenges and see things from different angles. You learn how to work under pressure, how to make tough decisions with very little information, and most importantly, how to put the safety and security of the people you're protecting above everything else. Those are all really valuable skills for someone leading an agency like the FBI.
So it's not just about his political views or his media presence. It's also about those real-world experiences dealing with high-pressure situations, understanding security and intelligence.
Exactly. And the articles also mentioned that Bongino has publicly criticized both Democrats and
Oh,
Republicans.
really?
Yeah, which suggests that he's not afraid to speak his mind no matter what party someone belongs to. Some people might see that as a problem, but others might say it shows that he's independent and willing to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, I can definitely see both sides of that. I guess it means we need to look beyond these simple labels, like calling him a Trump loyalist or a conservative firebrand, and try to understand his whole experience and how that might influence his actions as deputy director.
I agree. It's super important to avoid oversimplifying things. Bongino, like everyone else, has complicated views that have probably changed over time. It's the whole picture, his experiences, his successes and failures, his beliefs and his actions. All of that together will ultimately determine what kind of impact he has on the FBI.
Okay, so we have this complex figure with a long history in security and a big media presence who's now in a position to really influence the direction of the FBI. What are some of the things that could happen? What could this actually look like?
Well, one possibility is that Bongino uses his new position to try to make the kinds of changes he's been talking about for years, like streamlining government agencies and focusing on what he considers to be their core functions. He's always been a big believer in using technology to make law enforcement more efficient.
So a more modern and efficient FBI could be a good thing, right?
Potentially, yes, but it really depends on the details of those reforms, how they're actually put into practice, and whether they truly make the FBI better at doing its job. There's also the risk that his personal biases, his distrust of certain media outlets and his strong political views could start to influence the FBI's decision making.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't want to see the FBI targeting certain groups or individuals just because of their political beliefs. That would undermine the whole idea of justice and fairness.
Exactly. Protecting the integrity and impartiality of the FBI is absolutely crucial. The Bureau has to operate within the law and uphold the principles of justice for everyone, regardless of their political leanings.
Okay, so how do we, as informed citizens, deal with this new reality? I mean, it's not every day that someone with such a public and politically charged background steps into a position like this.
It's definitely new territory in a lot of ways. I think the most important thing is to stay vigilant, to be critically engaged, and to hold those in power accountable. We need to keep a close eye on the actions and decisions made by the FBI under this new leadership.
And by we, you mean?
Everyone, the media, lawmakers, watchdog groups, and of course the public, we all have a responsibility to make sure the FBI is operating within the law and upholding the principles of justice and fairness.
So it's about staying informed, paying attention, and speaking up if we see something that seems wrong that doesn't align with those core principles.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to demand transparency, to have a real conversation about the role of the FBI in our society. A healthy democracy needs citizens who are informed and engaged and who hold their institutions accountable.
Right, so we need to be aware and active participants in this process. But let's not forget Bongino's just one part of this whole situation. He's working under Director Patel, who also has close ties to Trump, and his own ideas about the FBI.
That's right. Understanding the dynamic between the director and the deputy director will be crucial to figuring out how the FBI changes in the months and years to come. Will they be able to work together and use their combined experience to lead the Bureau in a new direction? Or will their different ideologies and approaches cause conflict and maybe even make the FBI less effective?
It's like watching a political drama unfold in real life, except this one has real consequences.
Yeah, and those consequences could have a big impact on everything from national security to individual rights. This is something we need to pay close attention to, think about carefully, and actively engage with.
All right, so we've laid out the groundwork, explored some possible scenarios, and highlighted how important it is to stay informed and engaged. But there's one more piece of this puzzle that we need to talk about. And it's a big one. We were talking earlier about Bongino's claim that there were 2 attempts to assassinate Trump. I mean, that's a pretty serious accusation, especially considering his new position in the FBI.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to think about the potential conflict of interest there. I mean, as deputy director, Bongino is going to have a lot of influence over investigations, so if he really believes that there were attempts on Trump's life that were mishandled or covered up, wouldn't that affect his judgment in his official role? Could he really be impartial in those kinds of investigations?
It's like something out of a movie, right? A high-ranking official using his power to investigate something he's personally connected to, maybe even trying to prove something he thinks was ignored or hidden.
It definitely adds another layer to this whole situation, and it really highlights how important those checks and balances are that we talked about earlier. Hopefully, the FBI has procedures in place to prevent anyone from abusing their power and to make sure that investigations are conducted fairly, no matter who's in charge. The system is supposed to protect against personal bias influencing official actions.
But let's look at it from a different angle for a second. What if Bongino's claims are true? What if there really is more to these alleged assassination attempts than we know? What if there's evidence that's been overlooked or suppressed?
That's always a possibility. We can't rule it out completely, but it's really important to be skeptical, especially when these kinds of claims come from someone who has strong political opinions and a history of promoting conspiracy theories. It's not about saying he's definitely wrong, but we need to look at the evidence carefully and not jump to conclusions based on our own biases.
So you're saying we need to be careful about the information we consume, especially these days when news spreads so quickly. We have to question what we believe and try to see things from different perspectives before forming our own opinions.
Exactly. Critical thinking is more important now than ever before. We're constantly bombarded with information from all sides, and it's easy to get caught up in sensationalized headlines or partisan narratives. We need to be willing to dig deeper, look at the source, consider the evidence, and be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
Those are some great points to remember, not just when we're thinking about Bongino's claims, but in general as we try to make sense of all the information we encounter every day. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key things you'd want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
Well, first, I think it's clear that the FBI is at a turning point. With this new leadership in place, there's a lot of uncertainty about what direction the Bureau will take. How this new leadership handles the complicated relationship between law enforcement politics and the media is something we'll all be watching very closely.
And the second takeaway,
Bongino's appointment brings up some really important questions about potential conflicts of interest, the importance of being impartial in investigations, and the need for strong checks and balances within law enforcement. These are issues that deserve our attention and scrutiny.
this has been a really fascinating deep dive. Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
It was my pleasure. Informed citizens are the foundation of a healthy democracy. So stay curious, stay engaged, and never be afraid to ask tough questions.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, stay informed and stay curious.